All right. Should we slowly get started? As our numbers are getting up, as we are growing, I'm sure people will join. Feel free to keep introducing yourself in the chat. Let us know where you are based, where you are from, and we will kick it off. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Borders Online, and thank you for joining us. My name is Steph, and I'm the talent lead at Localize. And today we're diving into the world of global mobility and its strategic impact on retaining and nurturing critical talent. So a warm welcome. I say warm because it is icy out here in Berlin. A warm welcome to Sybille Schneider, who is joining us today. Sybille is a global mobility expert with over 20 years of experience managing employee relocation and at companies across the whole of Germany. We're going to be going over some key topics today for about 30 to 40 or so minutes. And then we'll open it up to you to ask any questions from you. And yeah, we'll wrap up with the Q&A. So yeah, I'm excited to kick off our conversation, Sybille. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, Steph, and the team of Localize. And thank you everyone for joining during your lunch break. It's very nice to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to kick off, Sybille, and learn a bit more about your journey and how you got to be in the world of immigration and global mobility. So let's start there. How did your career kick off and lead to where you are now?
Yeah, you said it already. I started working in immigration almost 24 years ago, which seems like a long time already. I didn't know anything about immigration when I started that job because I applied for it as a caseworker for a local relocation agency. And before that, I was working as a PA. And I thought, okay, this is something different, and let's see where it takes me. And I'm still here, so it was very interesting. And it was something completely different to what I used to do before. And at the beginning, I just started to complete application forms. I visited authorities with the clients. I gained a lot of knowledge from my co-workers during that time, and then moved into a more internal role during the years where we were supporting clients with their global moves. And after 10 years being an external advisor, I moved to a more in-house role and started to set up the internal immigration process there. And the experience gained prior to that helped me a lot to prepare policies, workflows, and anything that is required as an in-house specialist. Further in my career, I supported high-level due diligence for different geos in Europe and Africa to support the business and leadership with their decisions to grow in another country or to open an entity at all over there.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. So, I mean, it sounds as though you followed a similar path that a lot of people in this world face, moving from agency background to in-house. It must have been quite a big shift. How did you cope with that? And what were some of the, key learnings and takeaways for you?
Yeah, the biggest difference the biggest difference is to keep in mind that an external advisor can give a lot of advice because you refer to the immigration law, and everyone in-house needs to stay compliant as well and follow the immigration law. However, as an in-house expert, you have to keep in mind that the advice an external advisor can give you may not fit into your company policies, into the culture. The advice you're giving needs to change because maybe the employment agreements offered or the duration employees are staying in Germany do not match with the immigration law.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are some of the, I'm guessing, key challenges that you face. What else stands out for you in your experience? Things that maybe have stubbornly remained today with you.
Yeah, and I think this is something we covered yesterday in the webinar. For those who joined yesterday, they have already seen that there's a huge delay at the immigration offices, and that is mostly the showstopper for any decision made in a company in-house. That the timelines differ and vary from time to time and from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. It's mostly bureaucratic hurdles that delay the process. And therefore, it's extremely important to be involved in a planning process from the beginning whenever the first conversations in-house start, to move a certain amount of people, or even if it's just a few people, to Germany, so that you as an in-house expert get to know what is the plan, and not at the latest stage. Especially in Europe, it's sometimes assumed that there are no immigration implications for anyone, but that is not correct, because you need to assess case by case what kind of nationality the employees have, what their background is, where they're coming from. And yeah, that's what you need to keep in mind.
Yeah, of course. So lots of different, quite a big shift from that kind of agency environment where you're not dealing with those internal policies, as you mentioned. And of course, shifting, building those in-house connections. So that actually ties into the next topic I wanted to discuss with you. And I'd like to understand a little bit more about how you approach building those initial connections. How do you approach, positioning immigration support as a key part of the business strategy?
Yeah, the key is always the communication. So you always need to talk to the business, to the leaders, to any corporate function you are dealing with, not just the employees to make aware of a move, but it's really being involved at the early stage. I would recommend, from my experience, to set up a quarterly meeting with the ones who are making the decisions, who are in the planning process, just to be aligned and to be there. It shouldn't come from the other way around. So it's very proactive thing, reminding the business that this is the immigration, this is where you're going. Management of expectations, for example, is a good thing, so that you really start explaining the process, and that mostly helps because they're extremely busy with other important tasks, and they appreciate that someone is taking care of it. So I always recommend set up that meeting. Of course, it depends on the company culture and how often you connect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess you make a good point with having that quarterly meeting, having a regular check-in, because naturally, like with most things, global mobility is super dynamic, and things are always changing. So what sort of trends are you observing when it comes to how talent is moving, where they're moving from, and when they're coming to the DACH region?
Yeah, I think that's what we mentioned yesterday as well in the webinar, that due to the ongoing delays at the German authorities, the country has become less attractive, because nobody wants to queue outside a foreigner's office in the middle of the night just to pick up a document, or to even apply for a document. Sometimes I have heard, or I've seen from my experience, it's up to 1 year waiting time. And being in immigration for such a long time, I've never seen such a chaotic, bureaucratic disaster at the authorities. Documents get lost, permits are issued incorrectly, then you have to go back to amend them. You never get an appointment for that. Employees cannot travel, they are frustrated, they haven't seen their families. And even if you need to go for an emergency appointment, it is difficult. You have the example of Munich I can give is you have an emergency database or something where you can book an appointment, but you never get through that because it's always booked. So what if you really have an emergency, you're not able to book that appointment because there's no slots available. So you can get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and hope that there's a slot available nobody else has picked, and then you can book it. But so that's something I have seen has changed a lot, that the country is becoming less attractive. Of course, the authorities, they want to allow people to stay in Germany and to work. Therefore, the law is protecting everyone, saying, yes, you can work as long as your employer or a vendor has submitted the application in time, but they don't have a valid permit. And that relates into difficulties when signing a contract for a lease or opening a bank account. Bringing dependents will be a challenge. That's always a major issue. And of course, we have a new immigration law, which was implemented in November and is going to be more implementations in March and June next year. It's trying to attract new talent because the salary is reduced. It's giving more opportunities for juniors, for those who don't have a university degree. Germany is planning to implement an opportunity card and so on. But after being in immigration for such a long time, it's always depending on how the authorities implement it and how caseworkers interpret the new law. So it's very challenging. And of course, the new world is moving non-European nationals within the European Union. That is still something that is not that easy, because it has to be checked case by case. Every European country has their different rules to follow. Also, it's a European law, or the blue card, for example, is considered to make it less complicated, but you always have to check what is happening in the country you're planning to work at. And that can be frustrating for a lot of employees and, of course, for the business.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mean employees in one company, maybe moving from one company in one country within Europe to another country in Europe, or even staying within the same company and shifting different bases?
Yeah, even if they're staying with the same company, if they are saying you have an opportunity, let's say moving from Germany to Spain, it isn't necessarily the fact that in Spain everything will just be accepted and you can start working there, and the other way around.
So dealing with the gray areas and trying to manage those, uncertainties that might be case by case, as you mentioned. Got it. And so you mentioned, essentially, these changes that are coming into the law, a lot of things to look forward to, hopefully for 2024. And with it approaching, of course, many people in HR, many people in operations are going to start planning, budgeting, if they haven't already started these conversations. Would you say it's fair to say that now is the moment to maybe have these kinds of conversations about, communicating how important your work is to get essentially the resources, the support, the budget that you need in order to set up the function?
Absolutely. So year end is always a good time to look back at what kind of challenges has the company faced that year, what is the plan for the next year, so that every function knows what needs to be done or what to expect. Of course, that's always subject to change, because in the fast changing environment in every company, I assume there might be a plan saying, okay, we are bringing 200 people next year, and then in January somebody's telling you, okay, we are bringing 200 people now, but the other 200 are still in the planning. So just make some miracles happening, and that's something, of course, to discuss, to set the right expectations with everyone, that the immigration function needs, of course, some time, and that there are external factors everybody needs to keep in mind that are out of the control and that you cannot speed up.
Yeah, absolutely. So just like having that level of awareness of, almost over communicating, look, this is what we can achieve in this amount of time. We have to keep in mind that these factors might shift, these factors might change. And if you go from needing 5 people to needing 50 people to needing 200 plus people, that's gonna change all those timelines.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. So with that in mind, what advice would you give to anyone else in your field who might be struggling with getting leadership's buy-in, getting them invested in global mobility?
First of all, you need to understand in your company, in the company you're working at, who are the right stakeholders, who do you need to involve in the process, and who's doing what, and then have a very direct and open and honest conversation with everyone. Give them an overview of the process, because there are so many different work permit categories that are applicable for Germany that may not fit in every company, but it's still there. And people are talking to each other, and they're saying, but I've heard from a friend, and the friend has told me this and that. Why is it not possible here? So set the right expectations, that it's external factors and internal factors that may delay a process or may change the entire planning. So talk to each other.
Yeah, keeping that channel open. It seems communication, as you mentioned from the beginning, is number one. Having those regular check-ins, having those update meetings, just essentially acting as the go-to person when these changes are happening, communicating that with the business and with your internal leaders.
Yeah, and depending on the company you're working at, be approachable, and connect with the business or with the HR function or even the employees whenever something new is coming up, internally, externally. That is always a good relationship to keep.
So building those strong relationships. Excellent. And I mean, so it can often happen where leadership will see something like immigration support as a benefit and not actually a strategic business decision. How would you essentially change that point of view and have it shift from being, just, oh, this is just something nice we do for our employees, to something that, this is actually a really, really smart strategic business decision?
Yeah, I think especially in Germany, it's something you need to ensure that you are seen as a service provider and you're not the function that causes any delays. Everybody is there to achieve the same goal, to have a happy employees with their move and not too many hiccups during the whole process. And the other thing that came to my mind is it's not just a benefit, it's essential, because if something goes wrong and it's a non-compliance case, the company and even the employees might be fined by the authorities when it comes to an audit, or when something goes completely wrong, which has not been considered, or which someone said, okay, I didn't know that, but that is never an excuse. So that is always a good argument to say there are huge fines for the company and for those people involved in the process, maybe the immigration person, the HR person, the employee himself, or any managing director is responsible for the company. So it's important to keep contacts at the immigration authorities, either directly or through a vendor. And that's another thing to explain to the business as a benefit, so that there's one person who's approaching authorities, because if too many people contact authorities, you might jeopardize the relationship, because everybody is on a different level and they want to have one or two people they are communicating with for the company. And that's another benefit for that role.
Yeah, absolutely. So just making sure that you kind of have those connections, whether it's both internal stakeholders as well as with external stakeholders, and you keeping them updated on each of the individual processes, exactly how, how it unfolds depending on what the case is in that situation.
True.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot. That sounds like a lot to keep track of, and a lot to kind of, make sure that you're constantly dancing between those lines. What are some of the ways in which you've kind of managed to really bounce between those different stakeholders and really make sure that you're keeping track of everything?
That is really something whenever someone is trying to go by themselves and just saying, I have read this and that on online, or I've spoken to a friend, or I have approached the authorities because the caseworker happens to be a friend of my other friend, and I was trying to convince them to help me. And then you're saying, yes, that's probably a nice try, but in the defense of the company, and just to be reliable and seen as as an employer of trust to the authorities as well. Keep in mind that you connect with them, you speak to them, and you follow the rules. And therefore, I think an immigration function is extremely important, because there's so much knowledge that is not out there, and even caseworkers at authorities are sometimes not aware or need to check. And this is where you come into the picture as an advisor and support the organizations.
Got it. So you essentially in that position to kind of like be the middleman, so to speak, or middle person, so to speak, to kind of balance those different relationships with all the different stakeholders.
Right. And sometimes there are changes in the application forms, for example. So then you go, someone is using an application form that was published 4 years back because they have stored it somewhere on their shared drive. And that's something, if someone is working in immigration, will not happen, because you're always on top of what is requested or required, and you're not causing delays because the documents are outdated you're submitting.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So really keeping track of each of the different spaces, making sure that almost like every space has its own folder. Everyone has updated documents. You're keeping track of those changes as they're released, as you get like different publications of a change happening within a space.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's very important.
And so, of course, a big part of being able to get this buy-in from leadership, being able to really shift from that, this is a benefit to this is a strategic business decision, is by being able to show, measuring the success of it. So, a big way in which you can get that level of support from leadership would be to say, hey, look at this. This is how we're able to measure and say that this really demonstrates business value. What is your approach to that? How would you kind of measure the success of immigration?
Yeah, everything that we said in advance is something you should use as an argument, but on top of it, it's very difficult to show success in numbers when it comes to immigration, because 80 or 90% it's going really well, but then you have the complex requests and nobody's seeing them, and they are taking up all of the time of an immigration expert, and where success stories happen, and where you can prove and show, okay, this is why the function is so important to an organization. May it be you speak the local language, or you have a good contact somewhere, or you're able to solve something because something went completely out of control or went wrong. You work always with different people, with different nationalities, with different backgrounds. Even if you work with different authorities. I just got to know yesterday from my network that an authority, a small location, made a huge mistake because they were applying for a work permit, and someone was working at a client, and they inputted the client as the employer. They didn't even check the documents. The employment contract was from a complete different company, but the employee was so convinced that this is the employer, and even the caseworker didn't check any further documents. So now it's a complete incorrect title the person has received, and now it needs to go back to the caseworker. And I've been to plenty of events where everyone was saying, go to the smaller jurisdiction areas, the waiting time is not that long. But sometimes they are not that familiar with the processes, like the huge cities where they are just used to have that kind of a constellation. So that's something where you come into the picture, explain to them, thank you for being so fast in issuing a permit, but unfortunately it's wrong.
Yeah, oh gosh.
Our employee needs a correct permit. That's something, again, where you can, I wouldn't say it's justifying the position of an immigration permit, but just say, okay, this is a benefit because these errors come up at a later stage, and an immigration expert is identifying these things at a very early stage, because they just need one look at a permit and realize, okay, something has been issued incorrectly.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I mean, I can even speak from my own personal experience, because when I first submitted my application, I moved from South Africa to Germany in 2020. And in my experience, the first time I submitted it, I waited weeks. I think it was more than 3 months to even hear back or just get any sort of notification. And it just took forever. And, just this past week, I managed to get my changeover in Berlin in just a couple of days. And so it's so amazing to kind of compare like small town Germany, where they maybe I didn't tick all the boxes, or there were just too many gray areas. Whereas now in Berlin, when they're used to dealing with much bigger, high volume, it maybe made it a bit easier.
Yeah, I think that's something to be very optimistic now, because it does happen. So yeah. It really does happen, and it's really nice to see that there is some progress.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, if everything is submitted correctly, and this is something, again, someone in immigration is responsible for, to ensure that documents are complete, nothing is missing. And that's where you build the relationship with the authorities, because mistakes always happen, but if you have a good relationship, then the authorities will say, oh, from this and that company, they are normally always on top and everything is fine. Now a passport photo is missing. That's always my example. So yes, we need it, but we are not stopping the process. We are just dropping them a quick notice saying, hey, something is missing. Can you please provide it? But we will not put that file at the bottom. At the bottom again and just take care of other things. So this is what I mean with relationships and why you need to be on top.
Yeah, to maintain those strong relationships.
Yeah.
And I mean, this ties also closely into, you know, what I love as a recruiter, as someone in talent acquisition. Retaining top talent is, of course, both attracting and retaining top talent is a big topic in the business world, especially now as you know, companies are debating return to office policies. You know, there's more flexibility in some companies. How, or I suppose, where do you see global mobility playing a part in this topic? How do you see it kind of evolving through 2024?
Yeah, that's a difficult challenge for everyone, because everybody is looking at flexibility ever since the pandemic and working remotely. As long as you're working remotely in Germany, that's not an issue, but everybody has to be very careful if the employees, especially if non-European nationals are planning to work remotely outside of Germany, they will need work permits for those locations. So it's always difficult. What we said in the beginning, it's not a work permit for the European Union someone is holding, it's for Germany. And that needs to be assessed case by case. So it's very attractive to offer a remote work agreement, but it has to be strictly defined by internal policies to ensure that the employees understand that this is only for Germany. Of course, it will be less complicated. We have we've touched that yesterday as well. We have digital nomad visas. We do have remote working options for European nationals. That's how you attract talent.
Yeah.
But then the other thing is the support someone will be receiving from the employer, I think, is something very attractive. If they are not left alone with going to authorities or looking at application forms, for example. So if they have a support by a vendor, by an immigration person in the company, and I think a good tool is to, in future, and that's the way forward, to enabling employees to select what do they need as a support. There are, of course, mandatory things like you need a visa to enter the country if you're non-European. But do you really need housing support? Some are so very well connected already that they could save that money to the company, but they might need it for something else. So if there's not a one size fits all for the employees, but if they can select what kind of support they need, what is essential and what is on top, and if they have a certain amount of money from an employer, I think that's something where I have seen in my network the trend is where everybody is very happy with that selection they can make.
Yeah, so really managing expectations and managing compliance. I think, like, from my experience, I receive a lot of applications from candidates who want to be digital nomads. They say, I want to live between this country, and this country. And I want that flexibility. And when I'm doing those initial interviews with candidates, they're sharing that they really want to be able to, you know, spend 2 months at home in their home country and then come back to Europe and work from here for a bit. And then maybe, you know, spend summers out of icy cold Berlin, maybe. And so managing those expectations, I think, is going to become really, really important.
Absolutely. And I think that could be a topic for a whole new webinar, just talking about remote work, flexibility, digital nomad visas, because there's so many things to keep in mind as a company, as an employee.
Yeah, I mean, workationing is such a trend, right? Like, I mean, when I just think of, for example, being from South Africa, so many people in Europe are like, oh, I'll just go to South Africa for summer while it's winter in Europe, because it's in the same time zone. But there's so many more things, I guess, to also think about when considering things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit, I'm curious to understand a little bit more. about the world of global mobility and people that are just starting to invest in it. This is still pretty fresh for certain people and certain companies, where it's kind of, they're thinking about now, as they're planning their budget for 2024, they're going to just start investing in it. Where do you think they should focus to have the quickest and most impactful results?
Yeah, first of all, I would say having a good network in immigration. And of course, you're only building that over the years. It's not that you start in immigration and you have, everybody, and you have been to every authority, you visited them personally. That always helps, depending on the location. Some appreciate if you introduce yourself personally, or you'd send an email, or they have someone to talk to. So that would be my first advice. Have a good relationship to the authorities. Get familiar with the process documents required. What do you need to do internally? What kind of documents, company documents, do you need to prepare? What could be the showstoppers or delaying the process there? Consulates, labor offices, foreigners offices are the authorities I mean when I refer to authorities. So have a good connection there. Of course, it's frustrating most of the time. You get an auto reply, you don't get someone on the phone, or you are not able to get an appointment to introduce yourself. So be patient. That all takes some time, and you always need to start contacting them. So that's one thing where I would say that's the key to gain your knowledge and to have a good relationship with the authorities. Start networking everywhere where you can be, like on LinkedIn, in the industry, with other immigration professionals. And then, of course, track all the data you have. So that's the most important, that you're on top. And if you're looking at a huge number of employees, then get support by a team who's just helping you to fill in the data into a database, or however that works in your company. Stay connected with the business, what we touched earlier. Have a plan for moves, for extensions, for departures, for early departures. That's something to keep in mind as well, because you need to report that to the authorities. So you need to understand who's leaving, who's giving you that information. How do you get to know what the employees are doing? It's not just bringing them here, but once they are here, it's post-arrival, it's early termination, it's all these things to keep in mind, where you need to have an internal plan. So sit together with the functions involved and responsible. How do you get that data? How do you keep track of that data? Who's responsible? Is it the employee's responsibility to contact you for the extension, or is it you as a company saying, okay, we are now approaching 3 to 6 months prior to your expiry date of the permit. Now we are starting the process. Of course, it's always the employer's responsibility, but how you set it up internally, who's reminding whom is helping, because otherwise you're just sending emails back and forth, and that doesn't help anyone. I personally, from working in the industry for a long time, would keep a policy, an internal policy, very short. The new generation that is moving doesn't read 80 pages of a policy. Neither do I. So if it's a short and crisp policy with the most important information per country, that is something that is absolutely necessary if you're starting, so that everyone is aligned. So you need to really ensure whatever functions are involved in the process, HR, tax, legal, that everybody is giving the same advice, and not one function is saying, yes, we allow that, and the other one is saying, no, this is a no-go, or everyone is passing the ball to another team member that is only causing frustration internally, and that's something you should avoid if you start that in an organization. Last but not least, I would say be prepared for audits, because that's always the biggest fear of anyone at a company. And I know that most of the audits, external audits, are announced prior, but of course there can always be unannounced audits. Even have the receptionist be prepared for those kind of audits. I remember from a long time back that it does help if you just have quick overview. Of course, with the attrition in companies, you cannot say, okay, this person is responsible, but you can say department, immigration, HR, tax. You will find a work permit at the immigration department, an employment agreement with HR, and so on. So if you have that overview and not a receptionist just saying to an auditor, oh, we don't have these documents, we are not keeping them, that would be the the biggest concern. So keep on interacting with the function, set up a protocol, who's doing what, who's keeping which documents, so that you're internally aligned and prepared.
So almost having that like one source of truth that all the different stakeholders are referring to, where the knowledge hub is updated, you're maintaining those relationships, you're continuing those conversations to make sure that they know, oop, this has changed, or like this has been updated, or because this employee left, here is what you can find, X, Y, and Z.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, super, super important. I have one more question for you before we open up to the audience. I see we already have one question in the chat, so please feel free to add extra questions if you do have any. My last question for you is to kind of look forward. So with the changing landscape of work, we've gone through big changes across the industry over the past years, and of course, the current global dynamics. How do you see the role of global mobility evolving in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in immigration, it has never been something you can plan and a one-size-fits-all solution. So you need to keep in mind that there will always be a change, maybe internally or externally, factors that will happen and will impact anything. So you can't control that process. And you cannot foresee anything. I mean, we all haven't foreseen a pandemic. A change of law can happen. A caseworker can interpret a law differently. There can be backlogs due to pandemic, Ukrainian war, or now with the Israel conflict. We have seen an increase of the refugee applications, where there's a huge backlog now at the authorities. That's something we couldn't foresee. And that's something we just have to relax and say, okay, I need to stay compliant. If required, I as a professional would always recommend to ask for legal help internally or by an external advisor, just to ensure that nothing is going wrong. And there will always be changes, so be prepared for that. Build your network. That's the advice I can give. And the challenges, even if you have planned everything, there will always be something that is changing the plans, and just be prepared for that. I had a situation in my career in Spain and in Belgium where everything was perfectly organized. The process was set up. We didn't have any major challenges. The timelines were clear. Business was fine. And then the head of I'm not sure, was it the labor office or the foreigners office, but someone who had to approve the applications was new in the position. And that person was saying, whatever was submitted previously, I don't agree to that. I interpret the law differently, and I don't accept the documents of any company. So it was really all companies in Spain, I recall, where all applications had been put on hold and nobody was able to get any approval for their employees. And everybody was struggling and was contacting their legal advisors and saying, how can that be? We have always submitted these documents, and now someone new is coming in and saying this is wrong. So what shall we do? So in that case, it's, of course, if there's no legal background, or if this is something that's legally absolutely okay to do because they have all the right to interpret the law differently, then the only thing you can do as an immigration advisor is go back and say, okay, this is what they require now. Let's change all our documents, our processes, so that the new person is getting the documents they need in order to approve it. Don't even start to argue, because if it's a normal process, and I think it was just about the salary information they wanted to have provided, or more details in an application form, or something like that. Of course, it's a lot of work, but I would always say it's something you cannot control. It's frustrating, but just do it. Just change everything you have set up. Just be prepared for changes, and try to keep the damage internally as minimal as possible, and ensure that everyone can travel. And of course, speak to the business and the employees as soon as you get to know, so that they are aware something is happening and delaying the process, which is out of your control.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's almost like picking your own battles, right? Like, you control what you can, let go of what you can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would always say it's, of course, in that function, it can always be very challenging that people are approaching you and saying, I need to have that information now, and you have no time to assess and to give any advice. So make them understand that you need your time as well to look into all the different aspects of a move. If sometimes it could be a complex move, or if someone is saying we have an urgent requirement, just see what is urgent. And I remember when I started my career, we were always saying in our team, as long as nobody is at the border control, not able to enter or leave the country, it's not that urgent. So you can, of course, respond as quickly as you can, but yeah, an urgent situation is when someone is at the border control and something is going wrong and they cannot enter or leave the countries. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's a good one. And a great point to end off on my questions. So thank you so much for sharing all of your valuable insights with us today. Since we do have about 15-20 minutes left, I'd love to open up the floor to anyone else who has some questions. I already see one in the chat, so I'm just gonna read that out for you. And it actually ties into what we just spoke about, with the changes. In global mobility, setting expectations is key, and it's important to do it all the time with the leaders. But also, as we global mobility professionals, we have this pressure to deliver and to provide solutions. How are you managing this with all the inconvenience in the immigration office is bringing? Also, accompanying the business and keeping, in this case, Germany as a competitive market for the company. So how are you kind of managing these changes? How are you communicating it with the company? How are you making sure that Germany remains a competitive market for the company?
Yeah, that's what we touched earlier as well, is to have a very direct and honest conversation with the business, I would say, to ensure that whatever is required is available. And it's not just with the business to set up a process or to set the expectations right. So it's also internally look at the different type of permits that are available that might not be implemented in your company, but maybe it's worth a look at it. And then you need to bring in other functions. What I mentioned earlier, maybe something was not allowed in a company because your tax advisor said this is something we are not doing or we cannot approve. But of course, like you were saying, it's a fast changing world, and that is something to keep in mind. So I would always go with a very honest approach, saying, yes, this is what we are doing internally. But if you want to have another solution, we can look into that process and set up a new process. But then we might need other advisors from legal, from tax, to be involved in that process as well. So you can always change a process. I've seen that multiple times.
Yeah.
What was working for 5 years may not be working in the other 5 years because of the culture of the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of evolving with the times, keeping everything updated, keeping everything documented, and having that like one source of truth, as we were saying earlier. We have another question, and it's more about working with external vendors. So could you share your insights about working with external vendors, and what changes do you see?
Yes, I have been working with many external vendors in all kind of subjects, and I have been an external advisor, and I think what the changes I have seen recently is there are a lot of good people, a lot of very young people, which bring a lot of fresh and interesting advice and background, not even background, but ideas into the company and into the service they are providing. So it's much more relaxed, and the interaction is more on a friends level than something, okay, I'm paying your bills and you're giving me that advice. This is changing a lot, which is really nice, because that's the kind of international world we are all living in, and that everybody is very, very fast in responding, has set up impressive databases or information how you as an employer can access the data of your employees. So there's a lot of changes, and I know that it's a lot on the market to decide on who you want to choose and who you want to work with. But this is something I have seen. I hope that was what you meant by the question. If something is missing, please feel free to send it in the chat again.
Yes, thanks for the question, Elena. Let us know if you want some more meat on that. I've also gotten a few questions directly, so let me swing those your way. Do you think there will be less and less business focus on immigration and global mobility in 2024, given that companies are still being quite careful with how much budget they're spending? And if yes, how can we make sure to continue to give employees a good and reliable experience with fewer resources?
I don't think that the budget there are budget costs in immigration for the next year, because that is something every company really needs as a function internally, and there will always be moves of employees, especially these days. So and it's going back to what we said earlier. I think it's always to connect. And I wouldn't even say convince anyone about the necessarily of that function, just to be there and to ensure that you're on top of the immigration regulations, and that is something you cannot put on anyone's desk who is not familiar with the immigration process. Or, of course, if you're not doing it internally, giving it to external advisors, or do a combination of both, so that you're saying, okay, we have someone who's internally, but we will not add more manpower to that department. But then you can get further support, maybe by an external support, where you can select, okay, what is the service you need internally, or where do you need any support? That is something to convince the business as well. And I would always go, or the leadership, whoever is making the decision in your company. And I would always refer to the what we have said multiple times today, to the fines that will be, the company will have to pay if something goes wrong.
Yeah. So making sure that they're kept aware of what the risk would be if they don't follow the correct process, if they don't have the right information, if they don't have the subject matter experts supporting them that are able to provide that level of guidance.
Absolutely.
Got it. I have another one. And they say, thank you for all your helpful tips. Could you also share how you develop your knowledge as an expert and stay on top of changes in immigration laws and policies for different countries? Do you have any resources you recommend?
Actually, it is a lot by helping yourself, by researching information. There's a lot available everywhere, and have a good network. Like I said earlier, LinkedIn is a good platform to just connect with people, and a lot of external advisors have very good database for countries where you might not be familiar with the process, and you can check the basics on these databases. That's always a good thing, and that really saved me a lot of times. And getting external advice from vendors has helped me to gain knowledge. And a lot of they're not in immigration. You never have a training session available. You just have to be on top. You have to be there. You need to speak to people who have been in the industry. Of course, there's a law you need to understand and you need to read. That's a source you can use. but most of the time it's all by talking to each other, and especially talking to the authorities. So I always remember when I started, I had very good connections to the labor office. Back then it was the local labor office. We were on the phone like every day, just getting to understand the process. This would not happen today anymore because it's all centralized. But have that relationship with the labor office, with the consulate you might be working with very often, and with a few foreigners offices at your location. And of course, build up a network in your industry. So just find other immigration leaders who probably share the same stories like you do internally, and stay connected. That helps a lot. And this is how I gained my knowledge. And of course, I have a lot of brilliant co-workers, ex-co-workers who are now in new positions and different positions, and it's always growing, and it's always nice to be connected.
So really networking, building your brand, maintaining those connections, maintaining, you know, contact with the different people that you've interacted with through your time. I see Elena added to her question, and it actually ties into what you're mentioning around vendors. So how do you choose the right vendors out of the huge pool of providers in the markets? What are the most important KPIs or tools you use to evaluate them? And in other words, how to learn to trust the different providers?
That's a good one. I mean, trust is only built on experience and working with each other. So if you have a bad feeling when you get introduced and when you have your first calls, I would always trust my gut feeling and just say, no, okay, this doesn't work. Or of course, if you have a good feeling, maybe it doesn't work either, but then be prepared that you have something where you can say, okay, if they do not deliver what you expected according to your KPIs, then you need to end that working relationship. When it comes to KPIs, I think this is something you need to decide based on your company culture. So what is important for you? I can say from my experience, for me, it's always important to have a good track of expiration dates, of documents being submitted at the authorities, so that I always know, okay, this is something I really need from a vendor to provide me, and have an SLA of response time. So when do you expect what to be done, in what kind of, so if you haven't heard anything in 24 hours, what does it mean? So even if someone is saying, yeah, we are working on that, but get that in writing in the KPIs. But this is, of course, something you need to ensure, or you need to look at what your company is expecting. If you're saying, okay, it's fine if we haven't heard anything in a week because it's never urgent, then that's fine as well. So it's something individual you need to keep in mind when selecting a vendor.
Yeah, so really looking at whatever your internal kind of goals, targets are, what you're trying to aim for, and then using that to build out whatever KPIs. Finding
maybe sorry to interrupt you, but maybe what kind of support are you expecting? Are you expecting someone to complete application forms for you, then put that in the KPIs? Or do you just need someone who is submitting documents on your behalf? Then this is something where you can provide a template, power of attorney from yourself in the KPIs, and just say, okay, you have everything you need. Here is the information. Go ahead, process the application. But if you want to keep that control and saying, no, this is my interaction with the authorities, then don't put it in the KPIs. So just make a clear assessment first of what do you need as a support, and then what do you expect from the vendor to support you with.
So like looking at what skills do we have within the company that we can utilize, where do the skills gap lie, what do we need expert support on, what do we need, what level of support do we require? Yes. Got it. Awesome. I thank you, Elena. I guess we have time for one more question, which I got directly here, and then we can wrap up. You mentioned that offering employees flexibility is important for attracting talent. How do you balance that flexibility with staying compliant?
Yeah, that's what we touched when we spoke about the digital nomad visa and the remote working options. that you need to ensure that everything is in a policy internally to stay compliant with the immigration regulations wherever you're planning to send your employees to. So that is something absolutely to keep in mind, that you need to ensure, as much as flexibility is attracting talent, that there will be a lot of hurdles that may not be applicable to them. Not even the immigration rules, maybe your company rules are different, and that's something where you need to be very honest and manage their expectations again, to just say, this is what we as a company are offering. I know that the immigration law is giving you more options, but unfortunately we cannot give that due to whatever internal restrictions there are.
Yeah, so just keeping that open dialogue, really making sure that you're keeping track, like we said, throughout of the different things, and just over communicating. It seems the trend throughout this is over communicate, build relationships, and document everything.
Yeah, I think you cannot over communicate. You shouldn't send an email every week saying there's no news in the immigration law, and I just wanted to remind you, if you need anything, get in touch with me. I would say yes, keep it depending on your company culture on a regular basis, whatever that is, whatever fits best. So, of course, nobody is going to offices these days, so set up a meeting, a video meeting, to see each other, build that relationship, what you probably had built before when you went to the kitchen, pick up a coffee, and you met 2 or 3 people, which is not happening these days anymore. So it's something to keep in mind, to have on your agenda, and be very proactive.
Yeah, it truly does change things. Yeah, not having those water cooler conversations truly does change things. So really finding new ways of having those mini catch-up chats that we're missing from the remote world. I guess we're almost at time, so that's just about all we have time for today. Sybille, thank you so much for all your insights, for sharing so openly with us. It's been such a pleasure having you here. Yeah, it's been lovely.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And yeah, thank you to all of our wonderful attendees and for all your questions. Stay tuned for more of our events in 2024, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.